Hey guys, I'm hoping that the Hardy-Weinberg made sense. If it didn't, email me and let me know. And so I will put up more examples on how to do Hardy-Weinberg if you need them. But today's last lesson is going to be on basically evolution. Okay, so basically today we're going to talk about how the allele frequency changes in a population. And remember, that's population. If the allele frequency changes, that means evolution is occurring, right? You're seeing a change in the allele frequency. And when we used Hardy-Weinberg, we assumed that there was no change, right, in allele frequency. We assumed that the alleles stayed the same in the population, right? So what happens, though, when you change the frequency of an allele in a population? Well, when you change the allele frequency in a population, you see evolution occurring. And like, how is this possible? How do you see evolution happen when you change the allele frequency? Well, I'm going to start by talking about non-random mating. Non-random mating, okay? Because this will probably be the one that sort of makes sense, and then you can maybe apply it. When you have non-random mating, basically you choose, right? You choose the trait, right? So that happens in animals, that happens in humans. So let's say you're a deer, right? And you want to choose your mate. Okay, now who are you going to choose? You're going to choose the strongest, the fastest, right? And when you do that, right, like if you have two males that are like fighting, who's the female deer gonna choose? Well, she's gonna choose whoever wins, basically, right? And because she chooses that, she is actually changing the allele frequency, right? So when you do that and you choose somebody who's stronger and faster, that means the population will also become stronger and faster, right? You're choosing those alleles that make you better, bigger, stronger, faster. And so therefore, you change the allele frequency. And when you do that, you start to see a population evolve, right? You start to see the population change. Now, this applies to humans too. Let's say, okay, if a human, let's say the human population, let's say all females, right, just chose to mate with, I don't know, somebody with like dark eyes, dark hair. Let's say every female on this planet decided to do that. Well, if they did that, wouldn't we start to see the population change? Wouldn't all their kids also have dark eyes and dark hair, right? Wouldn't you start to see the allele frequency change? So you're going to see an increase in the allele frequency, so how often these alleles occur. You're going to see more of these dark eyes and dark hair. You're going to see that allele frequency changing, right? If all females on this planet decided just to mate with somebody with dark hair and dark eyes, the population changes, right? Eventually, you're going to see certain alleles like blue eyes, right? They're going to go down. That allele frequency will go down as we select for these traits. And that is evolution. Okay? So when we discuss evolution, you have to know what non-random mating is. That's different than random mating, which I talked about last time, which applies to Hardy-Weinberg, where you don't choose the trait, you just mate with whomever, whenever, whatever. So that is evolution, right? So evolution happens, okay? Evolution occurs when there is non-random mating, okay? Evolution also occurs when there's mutations, okay? Now, mutations are really important, right? We have mutations that happen all the time. If you look at my PowerPoint, which I hope you are on Schoology, my own PowerPoints, I talk about beneficial mutations. And I talk about one case of a beneficial mutation. And it's this like boy in Germany who was an anomaly, and he was able to, anything he eats, it turns to muscle, okay? Now, well, you can consider that a beneficial mutation, right? Because you're building more muscle, right? So this is a mutation, and because this is a beneficial mutation, the environment will select for this, right? So that's natural selection, right? And so basically what happens is this boy's gonna grow up, he's gonna be big, right? He's gonna be this big muscular boy. And what's gonna happen is, like, maybe all these females are gonna wanna mate with this boy. And when they do that, they're gonna have all these children who are also muscular and big, right? And this all happened because of a mutation. And this mutation then changes the allele frequency, right? I mean, if it's a beneficial mutation, what's going to happen to the allele frequency? If it's a beneficial mutation, you're going to increase the allele frequency, right? You're going to see it more often in a population. Now, when we talk about evolution, we're talking about the population changing, right? We're not talking about one person gets the mutation and it's beneficial and then that person dies with the mutation. That's not a population evolving. A population is a group of the same species that live together at the same time. Like, it's a group of the same species. So evolution occurs when you start seeing that mutation become prevalent, or you see it occur more often and becomes very common in the population, right? So let's say this boy who has super muscles doesn't mate, right? Well, that mutation dies with him, and you can't say the human population has evolved because one person has this mutation, but then it doesn't pass forward, and then the kids don't get it, right? When you start seeing lots of kids have it, and then they pass it down to their kids, and then the population changes, and then, you know what? 50% of us end up having this muscle gene. Well, that's evolution. That's when you see evolution occurring, when, like, the population of, you know, when the population has this trait, right? Most people. There are also harmful mutations, and I talk about a harmful mutation in my PowerPoint. And if you have a harmful mutation, well, you're going to select against that, right? So you're going to start seeing that go away. So you select against it. And I have an example of a harmful mutation where, like, the muscles in your body turn to bone. And you can take a look at my PowerPoint because it's super interesting. And another kind of mutation that you're going to often see, like, sickle cell anemia, because sickle cell anemia is this weird case where this is what a normal red blood cell looks like. This is what a normal red blood cell looks like. And this is what a sickle cell red blood cell looks like. And if you have a sickle cell red blood cell, you can no longer transport oxygen. So your transport of O2 goes way down. And basically, if you are like little s, okay, so let's say big S is normal. If you're big S, that means you're normal. If you're little s, that means you have sickle cell anemia. And if you are big S, that means you're heterozygous. What you're going to see is about 60% normal red blood cells and about 40% sickle cells. Now, you're going to live if you're heterozygous, but you're carrying some of these sickle cells and you're carrying some of these normal red blood cells. And if you carry this sickle cell allele, if you carry this little s, right? So the sickle cell allele is little s is the sickle cell allele. If you carry that, you actually become resistant to malaria, right? And malaria is a disease that mosquitoes, right? Here's a mosquito. And when it bites you, when the mosquito bites you, you get malaria, right? It's this parasite that mosquitoes carry, and malaria can be fatal. But if you are heterozygous, or if you're homozygous recessive, if you carry this sickle cell allele, you don't get malaria. So you're going to have a selective advantage. Now, this advantage is only going to be okay if you live in Africa where malaria is there. But like if you come to Canada and there's no malaria, then there's actually no selective advantage to having that sickle cell allele, right? So you're going to start to see, you're going to select against that, right? And that if you're in Canada, most people will be big S. We're normal, right? But if you live in Africa, you might see more people carry these sickle cell alleles because it has a selective advantage, protects you against malaria. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so now what drives evolution? Okay, so what drives evolution? So now we already talked about two things that drive evolution, right? And evolution is when you see allele frequencies change, right? The frequency of an allele change. And we talked about non-random mating being a driving force of evolution. This is why it occurs. And now I talked about mutations being a driving force of evolution, especially beneficial mutations where you want to keep that. And we talked about how evolution is not when one person has a trait and that person dies with the trait. Evolution is when a population has that trait. It becomes more and more common in that population. Now, the third thing we're going to talk about that drives evolution is called gene flow. And so what is gene flow? Gene flow is just basically when people immigrate or emigrate. Okay, so that just means when people move in to a population or people move out. Okay, when people move in, they introduce new alleles. When you introduce new alleles, hey, guess what? You change the allele frequency, right? And similarly, if you move out, that also means alleles move out and you again change the allele frequency. So gene flow is just migration, right? It just means when alleles move in or out. So that is another driving force of evolution, okay, is gene flow. So anything that changes the allele frequency, right, is a driving force of evolution. So that's the third thing that drives evolution. So hopefully you get this so far. And then the next thing that you guys got to know that drives evolution, okay, is natural selection. Now, we know what natural selection is because we learned about it in Bio 20. It's basically nature chooses or nature selects, right, selects the most fit, right? So basically, the theory goes, if you're stronger and you are, you know, and even with this coronavirus thing, right, like who's succumbing to it? Who's the most susceptible to illness? The weaker, the immunocompromised, right? And who's probably going to survive? Probably the young and healthy, although there have been some exceptions and they can't figure out why. But that's basically natural selection, right? And you can take a look at that. It's in my PowerPoint and we talked about it in Bio 20. Now, the last thing that you need to know that drives evolution is called genetic drift. And genetic drift, right, there's a really good video on the Amoeba sisters on genetic drift. I would watch it. It's just the change in allele frequency due to chance. Okay, so basically, like, if you're riding your bicycle and there's a bunch of ants and you drive over the ants, well, it's not like the most fit survived, right? That's not how it happened. You drove over the ants and they just happened to be there. And you killed some ants and some ants survived. That's genetic drift. You're still changing the allele frequency, right? So you have a whole bunch of ants. These are the ants, right? Your bicycle drives through them. You kill this one, you kill this one, this one. Well, didn't you just change the allele frequency? You did. These guys survived. These guys died, but it wasn't because they were more fit. It's just because your bike ran over them, right? It was due to luck or chance. That's why they survived. That's genetic drift. Okay, you need to know two examples of genetic drift. They're called the bottleneck effect and they're called the foundry effect. And so very quickly, I'm going to go through both. Okay, so the bottleneck effect is basically, okay, I'm just going to erase this, is when you have a large population, right? So you know how, like, when you look at a bottle and there's, like, it's narrow? So let's say all these guys are the population, right? And when you tip the bottle over, these are the only that survive. So, like, the cheetahs are an example. They survived the Ice Age, and they think that there was only one single litter of cheetahs that survived this bottleneck, right? One single litter, and all cheetahs are actually descendants of this one single litter that survived the Ice Age, right? That's called the bottleneck effect. And you guys can see that when you have this, like, bottleneck effect, and you only have 3 individuals that survive, well, don't you change the allele frequency, right? Here you had tons of alleles here. You had a huge population, a huge gene pool. But then, you know, maybe a catastrophic event happened like the Ice Age, and you only get like 3 people survive. Well, only these alleles are going to carry on to the next generation. And so, like, if one of these has, like, a disease or disorder, won't you see that allele being expressed way more often in all the descendants of that person. So really, you're going to see this change in allele frequency. In fact, when you have a really small population, then you have 3 people that survive, you're going to see a real big change. The biggest changes in allele frequencies, because you're only dealing with these alleles that are left in the survivors, right? And so, like I said, if one of them carries a disease, basically all their descendants are going to have that disease too and will inherit that trait. So you're going to get big changes in allele frequency with smaller populations, right? And so that's called the bottleneck effect. Okay, and that's an example of genetic drift, right? By chance, a single litter survived the Ice Age, and all cheetahs came from that. And then the last one is called the founder effect. And the founder effect is like when you have a population, okay? So this is the founder effect. And let's say this was like Germany. And then like a few of these individuals left to America and they became the Amish. Maybe this was in Sweden, right? And so that's the founder effect. The founder effect is when you have a big population and then some people leave and then they go to a new place and now they're in America and the Amish, right? And they breed with each other. And that is the founder effect, okay? Now, the thing about this is one of these people who immigrated to America ended up carrying a disease. And because the Amish bred within themselves, the incidence of this disease, which is like short fingers, right? And like short legs, that became more prevalent in the Amish population. And so this is also an example of genetic drift because these people left. It wasn't because they were more fit or one was able to survive better. You just had a population leave, right? And establish themselves in a new area. And that these people then, colonized and had babies of their own. And then their allele frequency changed. And the allele frequency changed because one of them carried a disease. And when they bred with each other, that disease became more prevalent in their kids. And so that's another example of genetic drift. Okay, I hope that makes sense. You guys take care. Hopefully I can upload this video. Bye-bye.